Imagine this. One day you wake up and everything that gave you security, faith, tradition, meaning, disappears. Not because someone took it from you, but because you realized it was never truly holding reality together. That's the feeling. Nietzsche describes with his shocking phrase, "God is dead." But be careful, he's not celebrating. He's mourning. Nietzsche didn't kill God. He simply observed that the modern world had already done so. Science advanced, churches emptied, ancient dogmas no longer convinced, and what remains when the foundation of morality, order, and meaning disappears?
A vacuum, a deafening silence. For many, God was more than belief. He was structure. He gave purpose to every act, every sacrifice. With God's death, modern man faces a terrifying freedom. There's no longer a set path, only an open field
of possibilities, and that, while it may sound liberating, is deeply paralyzing. According to a study from the University of Cambridge, societies with high rates of secularization experience growing levels of depression and anxiety. That's no coincidence. When absolute values collapse, many feel anchorless, adrift in a sea of doubt. Nietzsche foresaw not just a religious event, but a global existential crisis. The question that echoes ever since is, how do we live in a world with no obvious why? And perhaps the answer lies exactly where few have the courage to look. That's where our journey begins, in the silence that followed the death of God. Because that silence, as terrifying as it may seem, is also an invitation to create. Have you ever felt like you're living on autopilot? You wake up, work, consume, sleep, and the next day it all starts again. But at some point, maybe on a Sunday night or in the quiet just before sleep, a question sneaks in. Why? Why all this? That moment of discomfort is the first sign of nihilism. Nietzsche saw it long before anyone else. When we lose the old foundations, we risk falling into a dark hole where everything seems meaningless. Nihilism isn't some distant philosophical theory. It's in the emptiness we feel when tasks that once seemed important lose their weight. It's in that sensation that nothing truly matters. And worse, nihilism doesn't scream. It whispers. It infiltrates our routines, our shallow conversations, our promises of quick happiness. And without realizing it, we become prisoners of a daily life where everything is urgent, but nothing is essential. Nietzsche called it a disease of the modern soul, a condition where there's nowhere to go because we no longer believe in destinations. It's the collapse of grand narratives, of founding myths, and with them also falls the will to get out of bed in the morning with a firm reason. Journalist Megan Nolan, writing for The New Statesman, described this feeling as emotional nihilism, a widespread sense that every emotion is performative and every belief disposable. It doesn't just affect the young or the skeptical. It's a silent epidemic. But there is a way out. Nietzsche believed that facing nihilism head-on is the first step toward overcoming it. Pretending it doesn't
exist only gives it more power.
And if we're willing to dive into that abyss, maybe we'll find at the bottom not the end, but a beginning. Because sometimes the void isn't the absence of meaning, it's the space created so that you can build a new one. In the middle of this abyss, Nietzsche points to a daring exit. He doesn't suggest going back to old values, nor does he ask us to believe in new illusions. Instead, he presents something radical, the will to power. But beware, this concept is often misunderstood. The will to power isn't a desire to dominate others. It's not about oppression, authoritarianism, or blind pride. For Nietzsche, the will to power is the vital force that drives us to grow, to overcome, to create. It's that energy that moves us when everything seems lost. When even without guarantees, you decide to rise, keep going, and reinvent your life. It's the courage to assert yourself in a world that offers no certainty. Not because meaning is ready-made, but because you can create it. Nietzsche believed that in the absence of absolute values, human beings can, and must, become the authors of their own values. In other words, if the universe is silent, let your voice echo. If the world doesn't offer you a why, then you must be the one to create a how. The will to power is this act of affirmation, of transformation. It's the strength that allows us not just to survive chaos, but to dance upon it. It invites us to turn pain into expression, failure into learning, and absence into potential. The Nietzsche Institute of Germany has published studies highlighting how this concept influenced modern psychology, especially theories around resilience, self-efficacy, and purpose. Ultimately, the will to power is an intimate, creative, and courageous response to the void. A reminder that even when everything seems to lose its meaning, there is still something deeply human in continuing. And more than that, in flourishing. Not everyone responds to the void by creating new values. Some choose the opposite path, the path of resentment. For Nietzsche, this is the greatest danger in a post-God world. The resentful person is one who, in the face of their own powerlessness, turns their pain into morality, not out of nobility, but out of revenge disguised as virtue. Resentment is born when we stop striving to overcome and start wishing that everyone around us fails too. It's the poison that makes us reject those who shine, mock those who dream, attack those who stand out, not because they've done anything wrong, but because they remind us of what we've stopped being. Nietzsche saw this figure as the archetype
of modern decay, the man who doesn't create, only judges, who doesn't risk, only accuses, who prefers the comfort of mediocrity over the effort of transcendence. And to justify his paralysis, he redefines values. Strength becomes arrogance.
Beauty becomes vanity. Success becomes corruption. And this inversion is dangerous because over time, it disguises itself as virtue. The resentful person doesn't say, "I envy your courage," and they say you're being irresponsible. They don't say, "I wish I had your freedom." They say, "That's selfishness." Moral criticism becomes a way to one's own frustration. Clinical. Psychologist Jordan Peterson, Professor Emeritus at the University of Toronto, states that resentment is one of the most destructive forces in the human soul. It corrodes from the inside out, always seeking external culprits for internal pain. But there is a choice. There always is. We can follow the easy path of blame and comparison, or we can choose the hard and liberating path of responsibility. Because deep down, rebellion against others is often the pain of not having become who we could be. And perhaps this is Nietzsche's greatest calling. Stop pointing, start creating. Your resentment is not a compass. It's a sign that you've drifted too far from yourself. If everything we once knew has collapsed, if the old gods are dead and the new idols are fragile, then who should we become? Nietzsche responds with one of his most provocative ideas. The Übermensch, translated as the overman. This concept has nothing to do with a superhero or superior being in the traditional sense. The overman is someone who, in the face of chaos, chooses to create their own order. It's the individual who, instead of hiding behind herd morality or clinging to dogmas, invents their own values. They don't live to please, but to affirm. With courage, with art, with power. Nietzsche didn't describe the overman as an idealized and distant figure, but as a real possibility, a direction, a calling, not someone unreachable, but someone who consciously refuses to be just another cog in the machinery of mediocrity. This new kind of human isn't born ready. They are sculpted through pain, through doubt, through the radical responsibility of existing without crutches. And that freedom can be dizzying, but it's also the only authentic way to live in a world where old meanings no longer hold anything up. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy affirms that the concept of the Übermensch is central to understanding Nietzsche's post-religious ethics. It is not a new deity, but a symbol of creative transcendence, of someone who rises above resentment and guilt and turns life into art. And you? Are you still waiting for someone to tell you what to do? Or are you ready to become the architect
of your own existence? The overman begins exactly there, in the refusal to submit to what no longer makes sense.
And in the courage to create a new meaning, even if no one else understands it. Every great transformation is born from a crisis. It might be a loss, a collapse, a moment of deep despair. Nietzsche knew this. He himself went through intense periods of suffering, solitude, and inner conflict. But it was in those ruins that he wrote his most powerful ideas. Crisis, when well understood, is a portal. Yes, it tears you down, but in doing so it offers something stability never could, the chance to be reborn, not as you were, but as you could be. Creation in this context is not just art or literature, it is the creation of the self. It is the act of gathering the broken pieces of your identity and reorganizing them into something new. It's making your life a masterpiece, not a poorly edited draft. But this requires courage, because it's much easier to repeat what we already know. It's more comfortable to follow the path everyone else points to, even if it leads to boredom, apathy, and emptiness. Nietzschean courage is not the absence of fear. It is the act of moving forward even with fear present. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, said that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This phrase perfectly echoes Nietzsche's spirit. Because changing oneself is the most radical gesture of freedom, you can choose to be a spectator of your own story, or its author. You can live from memories and regrets, or from decisions and reinventions. Crisis is inevitable, but creation is a choice, and courage the fuel that gives that choice form. In the end, Nietzsche didn't want to convince you of anything. He wanted to provoke you, to make your existence an act of affirmation. And that in times of emptiness is a quiet but profound revolution. When the great dogmas fall, when the promises go unfulfilled and the sky seems empty, many fall into despair. But others make a different choice. Instead of waiting for an answer from above, they look within. Nietzsche didn't want you to replace one idol with another. He wanted you to stop looking outside for what, deep down, has always been inside you. And that requires a difficult kind of listening to your own conscience. That silence, the silence of God, is often interpreted as abandonment. But what if it's actually an invitation? An open space for your own voice to emerge. A fertile void where, for the first time, you're not repeating, but choosing. In practice, this means stopping the chase for validation, stopping the obedience to scripts that were never written by you, and beginning to ask real questions. What moves me? What truly makes sense to me? Not just to others. These questions, as simple as they seem, can change lives. American writer Anne Lamott once described that silence isn't the absence of a response, it's a different kind of listening. Sometimes the universe doesn't speak because it's waiting for you to speak first. Hearing your own voice takes courage, because it may lead you down paths others don't understand, but it can also return to you the most precious thing a person can have: integrity, alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you do. And in the end, maybe that's the deepest meaning of life after God, not to find a universal purpose, but to create a personal one and live it fully. A meaning that doesn't need to convince anyone, only make your eyes shine in the morning. The silence that once frightened you is now freedom. And the voice you've been avoiding may be exactly the answer you've been searching for from the beginning. Friedrich Nietzsche lived in the 19th century, but his thinking seems written for the most urgent dilemmas of our time. In a world saturated with information and starved for wisdom, his ideas strike like a necessary lightning bolt. Because today, more than ever, we live among ruins. The ruins of certainty, of institutions, of truths that no longer hold. Nietzsche foresaw the age of the void. He predicted the collapse of ready-made meanings, the boredom born of abundance, the nihilism lurking even in comfort. And that is why he still resonates so deeply with those who dare to question. He doesn't offer easy solutions, but a dangerous invitation: think for yourself, create, transcend. His ideas echo in modern psychology, literature, cinema, and art. Characters who break with conventions, who seek radical authenticity, who confront the abyss. They all carry Nietzsche's mark. Unsurprisingly, many of the 20th and 21st century's great creators cite him as a direct or subterranean influence. In 2023, The Atlantic published a detailed analysis on how Nietzsche's thought is helping shape a post-pandemic vision of life, a perspective no longer anchored in infallible institutions, but in personal reinvention and meaning-making. Nietzsche remains relevant not because he's fashionable, but because he demands something most thinkers avoid: responsibility. His call is clear. If the world offers you no meaning, become the source of your own. And in doing so, become truly free. If you've made it this far, it means something inside you resonated. Maybe the void that once frightened you now feels less like a threat and more like a frontier. And this is where Nietzsche leaves us, with a decision: to remain spectators in a world devoid of direction, or to become the authors of a meaning that only we can create. No one is coming with answers. There's no universal map, but there is a silent and powerful impulse asking you to be more than a reflection, to be present, to live not to please, but to affirm. Nietzsche believed that life only has value when lived intensely, not recklessly, but truthfully, showing up with full presence in each act, each word, each refusal, refusing cynicism, refusing comfort, refusing to remain silent when your soul wants to speak. So the real question is no longer, what is the meaning of life, but rather, what meaning will you create? If this reflection touched you, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it. And if you want to keep exploring how philosophy can transform your life, check the next video on your screen. You'll be surprised by what it unlocks in you. Thanks for watching. And remember, the world may be silent, but you don't have to be.